Hello, everyone. I'm Dara Jegede, Communications Manager at MIDiA Research. Thank you for joining us for this Be the Change Fireside chat in partnership with TuneCore and Believe. Today you will hear from Andrea Gleason, Chief Revenue Officer at TuneCore, and Mark Mulligan, MIDiA's Managing Director. They'll be deep diving into the findings and outcomes of the recently released Women Making Music study, as well as discussing the next steps we can all take to make a difference and contribute to change. The presentation from today will be available to you guys after the webinar. We'll have a Q&A session later in the program where you can pose your questions to our speakers, and do use the chat box as well throughout the webinar to send your questions, the Q&A chat box that is. So without further ado, let's jump right into it, and it's over to you, Mark.
Great. Okay. Well, hello everyone, and thanks for joining us. Hopefully, you're going to get a combination of some really important findings from this research report, and also some what we hope are going to be some really constructive pointers on how the change can really happen. And I think that's a key thing that we want to focus on here today. This is not just about identifying what the challenges are, it's also about trying to talk about how to move to the next stage. So very quickly, I'm Mark Mulligan. I'm the Managing Director of MIDiA Research. I've been a music, media and tech analyst for far too many years now, and it's been really exciting to work with TuneCore and Believe in this project. Looking forward to walking you through some of the findings. But first, I'd like to let Andrea introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Andrea Gleason. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer of TuneCore, and I have been with the company for about 5 years now. A little bit of background on me is that I actually don't come from the music industry. Prior to joining TuneCore, I worked in e-commerce and marketing roles in the retail industry for over a decade. And for me, it was a very, very new experience to come from retail, where women hold roles at all levels of the organization, to music tech, where both on the business and creator side, females are underrepresented, which really led me to engaging with Mark on this study on a couple fronts, which really led to us having these discussions to bring this report together. So first of all, one thing that was really striking to me when I first joined was how many of TuneCore's artists, which is an open DIY platform for distribution, how few females there were. So the representation today is about 28% female, which is about the same level that it was 5 years ago. So we really haven't seen this grow. And I know that this index is far higher than the industry standard, which is about 11%, but for me, it's not good enough. And so, it's just striking to me that at the DIY artist level, on a platform like TuneCore, where there are no barriers, female artists continue to be so underrepresented. So for me, I started to look into, okay, well, what is the benchmark? How can we change this? And I started looking into research studies that were out there. And essentially what I found is that there weren't very many studies. A lot of them were really much more focused on what percentage are female, but not going into the why. A good one that I found was the Annenberg Inclusion Initiative. And because we started having these discussions with Mark, this was back in the fall, the only studies that had been out was from between 2012 to 2018. I know that a more recent one came out actually last month. And what I think is good, there's some very good insights that come into that report. However, it does fall short on two fronts. One, it wasn't very current. And two, it only focuses on top charting artists and what percentage of them are female. It did not have more current information, and was also not addressing the fastest growing segment of the music industry, which is the independent artists. So that's my discussion with Mark and his team started. And we wanted this study to be a little bit different. And essentially, it focuses on 3 areas that haven't been done before in a study. One, it breaks down the underlying issues and really focuses on driving awareness to them. Second, it uncovers the why and what needs to change. And third, really looking to what are some potential solutions to help us figure out how do we take it forward. So as I mentioned, the Annenberg study did come out a new version of it that came out last month. And I think for me, the most striking piece about it is that even at the top charting level, over the last 10 years, there really hasn't been a lot of improvement of the representation of women in music. And in fact, in some cases, it's declined. So for me, this study is coming in at a very timely time to take it from just being aware to helping us do something about it. And so I'm going to pass it back over to Mark, who's going to take us through an overview of the research.
Perfect. Okay, thanks, Andrea. So I think the first thing to say is really, sort of building on that is, what we wanted to achieve with this, and it's really trying to understand the issues, but really get behind, why we are in this situation we're in. Now, what I'm going to do is caveat what I'm going to say a couple of ways. So first of all, yeah, no small irony. Here I am, a man talking about female issues in the music business, but hopefully one of the things that you're going to find throughout this study and this presentation and our conversation is the challenges are ones that are faced by women, but the changes need to be made by men, and that's the sort of, hopefully, it's a really important bit that we're going to communicate throughout the sort of next sort of 40 minutes or so. Another thing is the study is really in depth. There's a huge amount in there, and we are not going to walk you through everything today. We're going to give you some of these sort of the key takeaways. So some of the most important things that's going to help frame the conversation Andrea and I are going to have. But the report is available free of charge to anyone who wants it. So at the end of this session, you'll see a download link where you can get it and sort of deep dive into all of the findings yourself. So very quickly about the survey, both in terms of how we did it and also just some sort of very top level sort of trends. So first of all, the survey we ended up with about little more than 500 respondents, of which about 400 were female. And so this is it's the largest survey, global survey of female music makers to date. We worked with a large number of female first organizations who help sort of share the list of their memberships, etc. And the focus is very much on independent creators, and that's across sort of artists, songwriters, etc., etc. So it's a good size survey. It's one at MIDiA we field independent artist surveys a few times a year, so we had a lot of data sets to benchmark the results against, those surveys obviously being predominantly male. So that's the sort of the methodology of it. And we also, for the report itself, we spoke to a lot of people one-on-one within the music business, everything from sound engineers through to to songwriters and plenty in between to get their sort of first-hand experiences. And then the report itself, I'm going to be shamelessly sitting on the shoulders of the work done by the rest of my team, including the two lead authors, which is Hannah Calhert and Srishti Das, who did most of the writing of the report and came with most of the findings. So in order to get going, I think the starting point is that when it comes to why women are making music, it's pretty much exactly the same reasons that men make music: to become recognized and respected in the scene, to build a loyal fan base, to make music and have people enjoy it. When you go down to things like getting a record label deal, getting 1 million streams, getting 10 million streams, all those sort of things, they are very much sort of tertiary, not even secondary objectives. They're it'd be nice to have it if it happens, but it's not the reason people are making music. So that's I think a really important point, that women are making music for the same reason men are making music, and they operate in the same industry. Now that should be the end of the presentation. That should be it. But of course it's not. Even though it's the same industry, even though they've got the same motivations, it feels and looks like a completely different industry for women. It is a completely different set of experiences and worldviews. And some of these things are self-perpetuating. Because these are the challenges, it intensifies the perception of those challenges and the impact of those challenges. So the vast majority of female respondents to our survey said the music business treats female artists differently. And before there's any of you there saying, well, that's just their perceptions. Maybe, you know, it's actually, you know, there's a difference between perception and actuality. What we would say here is that is not even important. What is important is that this is the perception that females have, and that impacts their ability to do things, because it impacts how they perceive things, it impacts their confidence, it impacts so many other things. So the likelihood is that there isn't that much of a delta between perception and actual practice. But either way, this is how women feel, and as a result, they feel it's harder to get recognition. They feel that there aren't as many role models out there. I won't go and list all the rest. We're all quite capable of reading all of the data, but the really important point here is that they feel that this is a different industry. And when we go in and ask them about what they see as being the main challenges for women creators in a broad sense, not just a personal sense, then you get these three key buckets around discrimination, resources, and confidence. And out top is sexual harassment and objectification. And yes, we're living in the era of Me Too, etc. But this just shows, this is at this stage, I'll walk on to the personal experiences in a little bit, but the perception among women creators is number one, discrimination is a key thing. And then around sexual harassment and objectification, and then we move on to things like ageism, etc. The other data point I'd like to highlight for you here is the resources, because this is really linked to some of the things where solutions are more tangible. And that's the idea of there being male-dominated resources. So resources can be everything from forums and discussion groups to training to mentors. Again, the important thing here is not even the degree to which this may or may not be the case, even though it certainly is the case, but it's the case of the perception, because these things affect women's ability to get into the industry, into making music, into following the dreams, and ideally building a career there. And if you remember where I started, women music makers want the same thing out of male music makers. They're operating in the same industry, yet their perceptions are completely different. And as Andrea was saying earlier on, TuneCore, even though TuneCore is significantly above the industry average for the number of female creators on the platform, it's still much lower, despite there not being visible hurdles within the platform itself. So this is about removing the speed bumps. It's about trying to work out how to enhance the path into the business for women creators. And then we move on to people's personal experience. And this, if you're a woman in the audience, you'll probably look at this and say, yep, I completely get that. I see that that might even reflect my personal experience. If you're a man in the audience, then you may well have a similar response to me, which is, I did not realize this was so pervasive. If you look down here, so the dark blue and the light blue bars are it happens to me frequently, it happens to me occasionally. Across most of these things, the majority of respondents said that they have experienced these things personally. It really is that pervasive. And I've been doing this job for many, many years, and I don't get surprised by many data trends anymore. Most of this stuff is, yeah, okay, I saw that coming, or I've seen this sort of the early indicators from other places, but this this floored me. And when you're looking at the fact that sort of over half of women say that they've had sexual harassment, whether it's objectification, inappropriate behavior, frequently or occasionally, I mean, it is just not good enough. There is no way that something like that should be so pervasive. And in some ways, looking at even at the unconscious bias, which is, much subtler, but in many ways more insidious, because this is, something that affects more people more frequently. Nearly half of women saying that they experience frequently the unconscious bias. And then, it's no coincidence that we end up with lack of confidence being second. If you're in an industry which you feel doesn't represent you properly, where you don't have the role models, you feel that the resources that you need to be able to get into that industry and be successful there, you know, if all of those things that you feel, you know, the system is set up against you, then, you know, you have to have double the confidence of a man in this business to be able to succeed. So, you know, it's absolutely no surprise at all that lack of confidence is like a second order effect of that. So the last couple of bits I just want to share with you is, one is looking at when we asked the respondents, what do they feel needs to change most urgently? So more equality and opportunity at the top, followed by increasing female representation and leadership roles. And hopefully 2 leads from 1. But these are, if you think about what's happening here, this is women saying, we're not asking for special treatment. We're asking for the same treatment. We're asking to have the same opportunities, the same ability to succeed that our male counterparts have. So that's about, you know, making today better in order to make sure that tomorrow is better. But there's also these longer term things, which is in order to really sort of change the structural issues, essentially create the guardrails that are going to help ensure that this industry is more balanced in the longer term. And that's where we get to things which are more sort of, some of them might be legislative, some of them are organizational and operational, some of them are, you know, sort of industry structure. And I won't, you know, read through them all, but I think the changes in the diversity policies and culture, policies are easy to change. Culture is much more challenging to change. Culture takes, you know, a good period of time, and Andrea and I will probably spend a bit of time talking about that. Mentoring and coaching, really tangible, really straightforward, achievable things to be able to do. More female-friendly resources, again, achievable things to do. So I think it's really interesting that the near-term things are, let's just make it a level playing field, and the longer-term things are, yeah, there's some things which might require, you know, government and, you know, and sort of industry structure and coordination and collaboration, and they're long-term things, but some of them are really tangible things that can be put in place as well. So I'm going to stop talking there a bit, and now sort of move on to asking Andrea a few questions. And the first one I'd like to ask is, so you've obviously spent a bit of time with this now, you know, and you got familiar with, you know, a lot of the findings, but the first time you read it, what was the thing that you read and you went, yeah, I need to do something about this now? What was the thing that sort of jumped out at you most?
You know, there were so many aspects that jumped out at me. It was, number one, you know, obviously I was looking at what can I action Andrea at, you know, CRO of TuneCore. And there were definitely some things that I started with, which I'll talk about in a second. But I think the biggest thing is that I can't do this alone. This isn't something Andrea can go solve because it is so systemic. And I think that it really showed me how all of us working across industry, you know, me partnering up with my counterparts at other distributors, working with creator tools, and that we need to work across the industry to work together to solve this. And that was the biggest thing that jumped out at me, is that this is just a bigger thing that we're all going to have to work toward, and as a group. As far as things I could do right away, I had the privilege of kind of seeing the raw data as it was coming in from the surveys. And so I was able to actually action a couple of initiatives I think is, you know, hopefully are illustrative of the kind of things we can start doing today. So number one, we know that female producers are the most underrepresented creator sector of the music industry. I think the Amberg study showed that it was like 2.6% participation, which is like crazy. So for us, we partnered, again, showing an example of like partnering with you know, other companies. We partnered with FL Studios and Soundfly to host a women's production workshop at the end of last month. And so we were able to have 100 female producers attend and participate in that, and really start to get those resources that we talked about, you know, in the study that they were much in need of. Another initiative that we did is we do a lot of education at TuneCore. So something I could stand up right away that was very easy to do is we have these smaller group learning sessions called VIP sessions, essentially. They're like classroom size, and we implemented 2 a month that would be dedicated to only females joining those, so that we can have collaboration together, female to female, and start to create that community and collaboration and education. So that's about 20 artists join each of those sessions. So that's about 140 artists. Last month I was able to impact. Now it strikes me, and it resonates that we have hundreds of thousands of artists that use TuneCore. And so these are great first steps, but, you know, this is really not moving the needle yet. And so this is where, you know, again, going back to what I said in the first point, is that we have to work together and in solving this across the industry.
Yeah, great. So I just want to pick up on something, a couple of comments in the comments room, and please keep them coming, by the way. So one of them is about the sort of my comment about, you know, whether it doesn't matter whether there's a difference between perception and actuality in terms of, you know, there's people feeling that the industry is, you know, it treats them differently. And I think, you know, for females in the audience, let me give you a little insight into a male mindset, trying to understand how to influence male mindsets to make change happen. So essentially what I'm doing, so my personal belief is that there probably isn't any difference between perception and actual, but with all of these sort of things, you know, if most men in the industry decided that all this sort of stuff should happen, it would have already happened, right? So what we're doing is we're trying to work out how we can change mindsets, make people think. So you also, you know, as unfortunately, as pragmatic as this is, one of the things you need to do is you need to be able to preempt cynicism. You know, so we've already had, by the way, you know, we've had misogynist comments and, you know, whatever coming out, you know, about this, because there are people who just don't want to see this change happen. I personally believe the vast majority of people do want to make the change happen. They just haven't worked out how to do it or understood how important it is. You know, and that's part of what we're trying to do here. So really, by, you know, just positing that idea that, you know, it doesn't matter whether, you know, the actual trend is as strong or not. It's to simply offset, you know, some men who might be there saying, well, obviously it's over, you know, it's over reporting, so we don't need to take this, you know, seriously or not. That's why I'm saying the bit you cannot get away from, 100% of evidence, is that people feel that that is a situation, and that in itself is, you know, is reason enough to make a lot of this, you know, make the change happen. So I just want to very quickly pick up, you know, so you know, and I'm going to try to do this a bit, you know, through the coming minutes, is try to channel this through how men in the industry should be thinking about, you know, sort of what role they can play in sort of making these changes, you know, and obviously it varies massively depending on whether you are running a company, playing guitar in a band, or sitting in a recording studio. But all of the things, all of the ways in which you can make change are equally important. So let me just give you an example of the you know, right, you know, the guy behind the mixing desk in the recording studio. You know, one of the things we heard back from, you know, when we're talking to women one-on-one, we're saying sometimes it doesn't necessarily feel that safe a place for a woman going into, you know, maybe she's in the studio on her own late at night, you know, with a male producer. You know, even if something doesn't happen, and unfortunately we found, you know, heard about numerous examples where stuff did happen, that's just not, you know, if it doesn't feel like the safe sort of environment, why should it just be a male, you know, in the studio with a female? Why can't, you know, well, the record label make a point of getting, you know, a woman producer or engineer behind the desk, or whatever, you know? And if you are a male in that situation, then you need to do absolutely everything that you can do in order to make that, you know, that woman who's in the studio with you feel safe, understand their boundaries, and don't take anything for granted. You know, you as a male in that situation, sort of, you just feel, well, you know, because you're not in the position of feeling sort of unsettled or whatever else, you know, you don't feel, you know, necessarily that you feel, you know, that it doesn't come natural to you to think that you've got to say these things, but, you know, you need to help people understand it's a safe place. And most importantly, do not cross any line. You know, it's really, you know, simple little things like that in day-to-day life are really important. At a more organizational sort of level, if you're in a company of any level of influence in that company, you should be making sure, as the absolute minimum, that not only you giving there being sort of an equality of opportunity, but you know, sometimes you have to, you know, make it, you know, go a little step further. You know, we saw that lack of confidence is a really big issue. So you need to be working out, how can you make people feel more at ease? Can you make people feel like they can speak out? So one of the things that came up is this sort of difference between equity and equality, which I think plays a really important role here. And So Andrea, I know you've got some thoughts on that. Do you want to sort of maybe explain it?
Yes. So just in case, just for everyone to understand the difference. So equality means that each individual or group of people is given the same resources and opportunities, right? So everybody gets the same. Equity is a little different. So it recognizes that each person has different circumstances and thus allocates the exact resources and opportunities needed to reach the equal outcome. So essentially, you start with where do I need to get to, and then make sure that you're supporting to get to that end result. So a couple examples on this. TuneCore and our parent and TuneCore's parent company Believe, we set a goal at the organization level that we will have 50-50 gender parity. So in order to do this, we really had to focus on two things. One is, what are we doing with recruiting? And two, how are we handling our people development? And then I'm going to explain how both of these things are illustrative for some of these larger things we need to tackle. So recruiting, let's think about that, right? You want to give equal opportunity that you can fill an open role with either a male or a female. Well, you may actually be getting more males applying. I think of, at TuneCore, we're a tech music company, and we actually have a lot of developers. That is very heavily male dominated as well. TuneCore gets a double whammy because we're in tech and music, both like male dominated industries. And so what do you have to do? You have to then take more time on your recruiting and make sure that the resumes that are getting passed for candidates to the hiring manager, that if you're going to send over 10 candidates, you send 5 strong male candidates, 5 strong female candidates. And then, obviously you're going to hire for the best person for the job. It's not that we're saying you're going to try to hire a female just to like hit that quota of the 50-50 parity. You always want to hire the best person. But what that means, using this as a real life example of how is it equity, you are taking more time to actually get to creating that equal opportunity, because it's not naturally happening. So how are you putting extra effort to make it happen? Same applies for development of our staff, right? Like we want women to continue to grow in our organization. And so, you mentioned confidence, right, as a key factor in this study. Okay, if the females are lacking confidence, do we get them courses on presentation skills, or on the topics where they maybe aren't as confident, but you see so much potential in them if they get a little more support in learning about these things, that they can actually get to that level. And one-on-one coaching, whatever it may be, essentially providing that extra support. The same exact thing applies to other sectors of the music industry. If you take that same approach and do it for how are we filling our industry panels, right? Okay, we've got 6 people on the panel. All right, can we slate that we have 3 male, 3 female? Don't give women their own panel in the corner. Let's make sure that they're represented on all of these panels. And so that way it may take a little bit more time because there's less women in the music industry, but this is how we start to drive this change, that we get women at the table speaking and having a voice. Same thing with A&R, right? Okay, you've got to sign, 10 artists this year. Okay, what is the makeup? Instead of just having your one female act, okay, are you making sure that you're looking at all the very talented females that you should be also exploring and signing? And yes, there's less of them coming to the table. As you can see, there's less of them in the pool, even at TuneCore, right? So there's just less participating. But as you start to create the opportunities, more participation starts to happen. And so you almost need to start with, okay, how are we providing the education to help more females be able to have the tools they need to get to the levels to be professional, but then they've got to be able to participate and have the opportunity. If I stop and think about my career, because I've done a lot of soul searching, with this study come out, thinking, it's not beyond me that I'm kind of a rarity of a woman at a C-level in the music industry. And I feel very fortunate about where I'm at. I think of, how did I get here? I had really amazing leadership examples that invested in me. They gave me opportunity to test, learn, stretch my leadership skills. They got me a coach to help me learn and get past delegation. That was a key thing I had to get over. We all have our thing that we have to sit there and work at. And they invested in me, and they showed me what good leadership looks like. And they gave me the opportunity to do it. So same thing applies in the music industry for female, both on the business and creator side. They need the investment in resources and access to them, and then they need opportunity. And so that's where we need to approach both of those things, and how are we creating more opportunity? It comes hand in hand.
Yeah, great. I'm just going to quickly go back to a couple of the comments in the comment stream. So there's a couple related to how much of the trends which we're observing may be influenced or shaped at a sort of, a country or regional level, and how much the cultures of individual regions, etc., play a role, and they do. And there was a good diverse range of geographies and regions covered in the study, but I think there's a post by my colleague Srishti Das, which was put up on the MIDiA website last week, looking at particularly how folk music in India, traditional folk music in India, which has traditionally been quite sort of female-led, has been suffering of late because of cultural issues. So all the things we're talking about, sometimes there are markets where cultural issues essentially amplify some of the challenges even further. The other one of the other comments was about sort of how many of the challenges are particularly when it comes to objectification, are related to what the industry expects of a female performer versus a male performer, and that's definitely something which came out in the study, and there's a really important bit linked to it as well, which is the idea of ageism and the role of motherhood, and I use the word motherhood rather than parenthood, because that is the perception that the responsibility of raising the child is something that falls onto it just automatically assumes that it falls onto the woman. Now clearly that's a bigger societal issue, which is going to take time to change, but for a female in a music career, if already it's harder for a woman to be given the same opportunities of success as she gets older than it is for a male counterpart. If she then also finds herself having to sort of take a bit of a career break, or take the foot off the gas a bit in order to sort of bring up children, then it becomes doubly hard to come back in as a mother, maybe in the 30s or so. And so these are, when we think about how the change can happen, this is everything from how people think in marketing teams, how people think in A&R teams. And when I was saying so much of this change needs to come from the men within marketing teams, within record labels, there tends to be pretty good parity in terms of sort of the gender mix there. So there is as much of an opportunity for women in marketing teams within record labels to go and shape some of those those traditional norms, to actually say, well, actually no, let's do everything we can to go and make sure we extend the careers of female artists. Let's look at trying to make sure we're promoting artists who she might be starting her career later than we would expect a female creator to start, but if the music's good enough, if she's good enough, let's just make sure it works. So, again, I'm just trying to sort of, you will all know this better than I, but there are so many different levers that can be pulled. There isn't a silver bullet here. This is a combination of the micro and the macro, and everything needs to be done in order to sort of drive some of that change. Related to that, you may recall when I was walking through the data, one of the things that I was talking about was the tangible things which are quite achievable. It's sort of not that they're non-controversial, because there'll always be things where there'll be resistance, but things which are more achievable. One of those things is about getting the knowledge and the resources and the information. I think I've been following the sort of the independent creator space for sort of good half a decade now in detail. I'm talking to lots and lots of artists, surveying thousands of artists over the years. The thing which is in some ways most exciting about it is that artists are more empowered now. Independent artists are more empowered than they were before. They've got access to more information, to to resources, etc. And this enables them to go from 0 to 100 at a much quicker rate than they were doing in the past. And yet we see from this study that women are saying that they don't feel that those resources speak to them, or they don't feel they've got the same access to those resources, or they feel that there are times when they need to be female first or even female only resources for them. And there's a whole bunch of really good reasons why they might feel that way. So my question to you, Andrea, is what sort of knowledge and resources should we be trying to put in place, and how do we make it happen?
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought this up, and we're putting a real spotlight on it. So two things really kind of stuck out with me in the study that really kind of relate to my response to that. One, again, going back to the struggle with confidence, I think that's really important. And I think that as you have opportunities and can practice and make sure that your knowledge is solid, that confidence comes naturally. And two is, I think that, in talking to artists, female artists, since the study came out, talking a little bit more about the discrimination, one comment really stuck with me, which is that, hey, I was told my ideas were dumb and they weren't supported. And so, this came from a female producer. And so she felt she had to go work alone, and that's great, because I think that there's nothing getting past, grinding at getting really good at something on your own. I think that that's very valuable, but it can't just be that. You need community to collaborate on things and be like, hey, I tried this, is this good? Especially in music, it's a creative space. You really need that collaboration, and actually fosters creativity, role models, and mentorship. So with that in mind, I think that there's really a couple key areas. One, it's the same exact resources that all DIY artists need, right? They all need guidance on best practices, guidelines on how to avoid pitfalls, and making those resources available so that they don't have to do so much trial and error, especially when we know a lot of female creators often have to create alone because they're dealing with discrimination and not feeling supported with their creative ideas from some males, and or they're experiencing this discrimination in the studios, etc. So I think that, how can we make some of this education a little bit more accessible on that front? My thought is, okay, TuneCore recently launched a program called TuneCore Rewards. It's essentially a series of master classes on education for artists. And my team doesn't know this, so if you're on, surprise, I think we really want to put together one specific to females, a masterclass on female needs, because they are different. A lot of things are the same, but then there's a slightly adjusted, thinking back to that equity component of how we may need to augment with some additional things that they will need. And so that's something that is on my mind. I don't know when we'll put it together, because literally it's like a new initiative that we're just going to put on the project plan. But that's like an example of, hey, how do we build resources that are accessible? And this is all free for TuneCore artists. So that's an example. The other part is really important, which is community. And I think that we need to think about, how do we give access to networks for female artists so that they're not feeling alone? And I think that really segues, Mark, into sort of the next thing we wanted to talk about, right? Around the female networks and companies out there like Women in Music.
Yes, absolutely. So we in this study we asked about awareness of a long list, not an exhaustive list, because there are so many great associations and organizations out there, we couldn't literally fit them all into the survey. But we asked about more than a dozen or so of them about awareness. Then we also asked about active participation, and that's one of the things that was a little bit disheartening, is that there is a real sort of gulf between awareness of these organizations and people actually becoming members, attending their their sessions, or meetups, whatever might be there. So I think and again, this came out in the one-on-one conversations that we had as part of the study, as well as the questionnaire itself. And that is a really important asset there for women, is other women around them who are either going through the same experiences or have been through it, and things they can learn from. Essentially, being able to lean on others for insight, for for guidance, for expertise, for moral support, all those sort of things. And so Andrea, what are your thoughts about how can more women in music make better use of the great work that so many of these associations are doing?
Yeah, and there's so many of them. We mentioned Women in Music. There's She Said So. Let's go on and on. We definitely can, as a follow-up, provide a list of those if you guys are interested. So, one thing I'll say is, when I read this part of the study, I felt like I was like shaming myself, because I am very much being a guilty party in this, where I know of these organizations and did not join them, and shame on me for it because it's wrong. One, because I need collaboration and community and bouncing ideas with other females. And then secondly, because I need to be giving back. Like I mentioned, I had some amazing females that really took me under their wing and saw potential in me, and I need to be doing the same. And so I think that that's something to answer this question. Really, there are questions that you as a female or individual who's joining, even for males, you need to ask yourselves these questions. So one, if you're a female that is a member of one of these organizations, are you making an active effort to bring another female with you? So that's something you can do. Be like, hey, there's plenty of open sessions all the time. Like, hey, can you bring someone? Because I think of it a lot like the gym, right? You don't want to go and then you get there and you're like, I feel so good. I'm so glad I came. So it's the same kind of thing. You got to bring other females with you and have them drink the Kool-Aid. Secondly, if you are a female who is not a part of one of these organizations, why not? Look them up, find the one that speaks to you and join one meeting. Just join one, you don't have to commit. And then as you see the value, like, join it, because you will find that having that community will be a huge support to you. If you are a leader in an organization, male or female, whoever it is, are you helping give, your employees, male or female, access to these memberships? We recently actually just gave complimentary membership to Women in Music to all of our staff, male and female, because males can join too. So also know that. That's a starting point, but it shouldn't just stop there. I think that we can take a more active role as there are events coming up, bring them front and center. Hey, join this. Did you want to join this? This is coming up. It's a very relevant topic. I encourage you to go. And that is how we start to have people participate. So I think it really starts, and you have to look both yourself and then as an organization, what are we doing to encourage this? Because that was a disheartening one for me. And I have joined now, and I'm joining as many of them as I can, because I should. So
great. So that brings us on to one of the last questions before we open it up to the audience. And that is, so you've spoken very eloquently about a lot of the great things that you're helping drive within TuneCore, and I think hopefully we, in this short amount of time, we've given we've seen a few sort of ideas about things that you can do, and hopefully a lot of what Andrea has walked through, a lot of you can be able to think about. Great, here's some some really good models of best practice to put in place. So there's the change that can happen, each of us individually, wherever we are, but then there's the industry level change, and so it's some of the things that do need to happen in an industry level, really what we want is to work out ways in which these can happen without there needing to be another Me Too moment. That it doesn't need to be some sort of horrific series of sort of things that are brought to light, that goes and makes people sort of shocked into making a change. Hopefully the statistics in this report are shock enough. They're enough there to say how much does need to be changed. So it's a real challenge. How do we bring along industries? And you might say that the music industry isn't an industry. You've got the live industry is one thing in itself. You could say the production side is another. You could say that big record labels versus independent record labels versus DIY artists. All those are separate components as well. So what do you think, Andrea, are the ways that we can sort of drive industry level change? What sort of issues can be best addressed through, and how can that actually happen?
Yeah. So I think that, I know that we want to talk about the industry, but I think for me personally, I think you have to kind of clean up your own house before you can really address the wider challenges at large. And you need to kind of almost do both at the same time. So for me, it's like, you have to ask yourself those tough questions if you're in a company within the music industry. It's like, do I have a diverse team? What does that look like today? You got to know where you're at to know where you have to go. Do I have a diverse organization? Even if your team's a little smaller, a subset, okay, is the organization diverse? How am I recruiting? How am I developing my females in the organization? How am I then again, supporting females, whether I'm male or female, we all need to support each other more and prop them up. So it's that individual piece, number one. Number two, then starting with the industry, how can we work across peers? I think that on the DIY level, it's probably going to be a little more actionable. because we have less constraints. And so I am in conversations with Splice and actually with CD Baby, my competitor company, but we have to bridge divides to actually start having discussions about how we're going to bridge this gender gap, and then come together on some initiatives. And I don't know what they are yet, right? Because I think our first step with all of with this initiative and with the study was to create awareness. And awareness is always step one. And then two, we want to start this collaboration to figure out, okay, well, how can we bridge the resources? How can we then bridge the opportunities? How can we create more opportunities? And out of these collaborative discussions, can we join forces to actually drive to something bigger? So this is very much a developing area that I can't wait to do this study in a year again and see kind of how did we move the needle with some of the things that are in motion. And we'll keep you guys posted, so I don't quite know, but I think like number one, I think we have to start those discussions around the resources and the opportunities.
Yeah, and I think as well, when you look at sort of industry trade associations on level, etc., you think about the amount of effort and resources that are put into lobbying for changes in copyright law, or trying to change policy, and all these sort of things, which are obviously super important. But whereas most trade associations will have some sort of efforts based around driving sort of better equity and and parity, many beyond just gender side of things, it's nowhere near that sort of level. And I'd almost say this is maybe this is time for it to become a mission critical priority, because we're one of the things, if anyone's familiar with what MIDiA Research is, one of the things we look at a lot at is what we call the attention economy. And the idea that in the attention economy, everybody's competing with everyone. Twitch is competing with Fortnite, which is competing with Spotify, which and so you've got to grab people's attention. And when you look in some of those other industries, okay, games is an absolute car crash when it comes to gender parity. When you look at, say, for example, social influencers, if you're a teenage girl, for example, looking for role models and looking for people, there are a heck of a lot more in terms of the balance. Female influencers, whatever you may or may not think about influencers, a heck of a lot more female influencers, as a proportion of the total amount there versus female artists, particularly when you go beyond female pop singer artists and you go beyond that, and so there is a risk that if the music business in its broader sense doesn't start fixing this soon, it's going to start losing ground with other forms of entertainment. So there is actually a commercial reason for doing this, apart from it just being the right thing to do. There's also, if the music business does not get its house in order, it is going to start falling behind in some other other areas, and female audiences will start voting with their feet, which is, I think, is an important thing to bear in mind. So the last bit before we go to questions from the panel is so. I know this is a really easy question to ask and a really difficult one to answer, but I'll ask you it anyway. Is what's the first step? What's the first thing we do to make this change? So not necessarily talking about, you've spoken a lot about what you've been doing personally and what TuneCore's been driving, etc. But sort of, is there one sort of thing that we can say to to the audience to go and sort of take away and think about? How do we, what do we prioritize? How do we walk out the door tomorrow? Well, if you haven't got social distancing measures in place, wherever you are, you're allowed to walk out your door. But if you walk out your virtual door tomorrow, what's the first type of change we should try to make happen, and how?
I mean, I always say awareness is step one, right? So I think, like, if you haven't read the study yet, read it. Encourage someone else to read it. We also we'll share this afterwards, but we made some social ready assets that are good for Instagram and Twitter and LinkedIn, where you guys can post about some of the findings from the study. So I think that's step one. We also created a LinkedIn group. I saw Maria posted the link to it, and we'll share it afterwards, where we hope to collaborate with each other to really start solving for some of this. And then in that group, as solutions come to the table, we'll also also post them there. So if you're an artist or an industry person, please join. We really want everybody's participation. One, to get in, help us know how do we start bridging this with ideas, but also with then activating them as we get them into place. So so this is just really a starting point. And I think something that's on my mind, and Mark, you and I were talking about this a little bit too, is, as we think about where we go next, you almost want to start at the source. How do we raise the next generation to be better than the current one we're in? And, education and educational institutes are really, really key to that. And so like some of the discussion of where collaboration I want to have is like with, organizations like Berkeley, where how are we creating more focused education for females that we can kind of change this for the next generation? We definitely need to fix the current generation, but as we do that, can we get in front of it?
Yeah, perfect. So I'm going to move on to, there's a whole bunch of questions here. So I'm going to try to get through a couple of them before we finish up. But there's two which are sort of related to each other, which is about actually getting female talent into the music business. And I know this is slightly more of a record label question, but so maybe you can sort of.
I'll do my best. I don't know. Again,
sort of hat on it. But one of the questions is, how can we get more female talent signed into into the music business? And what role can women play in that? How can women within labels, within DIY platforms, wherever it might be, talent agencies, help ensure that more female talent is getting signed and given the chance?
Yeah, and definitely, I think women need to support women in a stronger way. So we, as women, have a duty to advocate for other women and be that. If we have a seat at the table, we need to use it. So absolutely, like if we have other, if there are 10 artists to be signed, and originally they were going to sign one, okay, how can we advocate to actually review and actually vet for more artists? Like, and again, using that analogy that I used about like hiring for a role where you have 10 resumes, you want to get through the pipeline, you want to get a 5-5 split. You would do the same exact exercise with making sure more women are being reviewed and considered and then signed. And obviously that's not easy. We have to get, this is again going back to what we said earlier, we have to get our male counterparts to buy in and to support us on this. And it needs, but we have to use our voice. And support the women and actively bring more women to the table. If you're a female A&R, bring more female talent to the table to be considered. And you may get shut down, but keep going. We've got to keep going at it, and it takes every one initiative at a time. That then, if we're all doing it, it will start to make an impact. So.
Yeah, there's one thing, and I know this doesn't apply to all record labels, but there is a tendency within record labels for there to be a fairly good gender balance. But when you're in the office, as you go further up the floors, higher up in the building, it becomes predominantly sort of older white males when you get towards the top floor. And that can be a real challenge for helping drive a lot of changes, etc. So, one of the sort of things I'd suggest, almost like guerrilla tactics, is in the areas, of record labels where there is more gender parity and where, where maybe more the leadership is female as well as more of the actual staff are. Use that as a way to be driving through change. I gave the example before within marketing teams. Well, it's obviously everything first and foremost has to be about making sure it's the best artists who are getting back. But if there's anything that ever feels like, oh well, this female artist, she's now onto a third album and she's approaching a late 20s, and maybe it's looking like she's not getting as much sort of, there's not as much sort of support from high on up to make it happen. Well, if the marketing team believes in that female artist, believes that her third album deserves just as much of an audience as her first album did, right, use that to push it. Consider those as not just want to get more budget behind this this album, but you go and make that release as successful as the first one. Then it's one more bit of evidence to say, look, it doesn't matter whether she's in the late 20s or early 20s. Right. Now, one of the comments here was, it's quite sad thing hearing about, so there's some male producers saying that, sort of a woman artist, who's 24 is getting a bit old. Well, the ways we prove that is not the case is by doing everything we can to make sure that women beyond the age of 25, I mean, it's a horrifically young age, that sort of, blacks to be coming in, but, sort of showing that they can. Why should it just be that you can have grizzled old male rockers, sort of septuagenarian at times filling stadiums? Why shouldn't that be, be women as well? I think one of the other questions, and I apologize not having been able to get through all of these, but, one of the other questions was about how do we get the sort of female first associations to work together and benefit from each other and almost like network the networks? Do you have any thoughts, Andrea, on how that could happen?
I think companies like TuneCore would be a great bridge to that, and making the options available to all artists. We can be a real support on this, and I don't think we've been as active in making that happen. And that's like an area that I'm definitely talking with my peer companies in the creator tools and then in distribution and other DIY companies, or companies that support DIY artists. That is an active discussion I want to have. So I think we can play an active role in bridging them and creating awareness to the organizations and an easy way to join them.
Yeah.
So
right. Okay. So we're going to leave it there. I'm just trying to get my slides back up and whiz through. So just want to say, first of all, thank you very much for taking time. Really great to see the really active discussion. Apologize again for being a man talking about women in music, but hopefully understand one of the reasons that I'm doing this is because men are going to be crucial to driving the change, and hopefully that first step, as Andrea's been saying all the way through, is getting the awareness of these issues. So the key thing here is take this as a challenge. Every one of you out there, get at least one man that within the music business to read this report so that they can go and see the numbers for themselves. Let's get that first task of awareness and then see where we can build from there. There's the studies available. I've just realized that some of these shortened links don't actually work if you can't click on them. So as a starter point, if you go onto the MIDiA website and go to the report section of the site, you'll see the report there. I think we'll send out a follow-up email after this as well, where you'll get all of the all of the sort of links and everything you need. And there's the Be the Change Making Women Making Music LinkedIn group that is there as well. And again, we'll send sort of an email with the the full links in there. So just before we wrap up, Andrea, have you got any sort of final thoughts or comments?
Yeah, I mean, I've been saying this all along. I feel like a little bit of a broken record, but, I think change really comes from an effort individually of what can I do and what can I do today? And then a combination of working across and stretching out to do things together with counterparts and peers. And so I think that if we all do that, we can start to actually move the needle. And I really hope when we do this study again next year that we show that we've made a change finally. Because the last decade didn't show that. So that's my goal for this year. And I want to ask all of you to take that and know that you can make an impact.
Great. Well, thank you for your time, Andrea, and and having sort of supported this really important piece of research. It's and I'm not saying that lightly. MIDiA has done a lot of research and important stuff over the years, but I think this is pretty much the single most important thing that we've worked on. It's been an honor to work on it, and as I say, huge credit due to my colleagues Hannah and Srishti, who led the writing of the report, and hopefully what we're giving you here is something which is where we can take this. So this isn't about saying sort of to the male audiences. This isn't saying women are some sort of at need group that need charity support. They want the same things from their career as male artists do. They operate in the same industry. They just want the industry to treat them the same way as it treats everybody else. So thank you very much, everyone, and thank you for joining us.